All right, well, if you're seeing us, it is Monday again. And if you're hearing us, welcome back from the weekend. It's always a short weekend, but we have another episode for you. And we have another guest. This week we have Karen Washington. She is Chad's personal lawyer. And we really wanted to have her on this week to really go over how to pay people properly and legally. So just a little bit about her. She is a professor at Texas A&M currently. And I kind of want to just go off of, I want to get to know you. So what else? Because I went on your LinkedIn just to do a little, prep before this, but, who are you? What do you specialize in? And yeah, go ahead.
I'm an attorney, mediator, and arbitrator, and I handle cases that involve different aspects of employment law, business litigation, those kinds of things. I also have arbitrations that involve securities, and I serve as an administrative law judge for the city of Dallas, and the list kind of goes on.
And she's so very well accomplished. Let's just say that.
I know on her LinkedIn, it was just is there something that you specifically specialize in? Like, is there one part of law that you really enjoy or that you like have a specialization in?
Specialist has a legal term, has a legal definition in the state of Texas, and I am not a specialist in that sense. But I focus on employment law and business litigation. I also, as I mentioned, I do a lot of arbitration and mediation, and in particular, I like the cases that come to me that involve employment issues, because that's an area where I've been working for some decades.
So, Chad, I know you want to discuss how to properly and legally pay people. I have no idea. For me, because I'm his employee, you just, fill out the paperwork and whatever you agreed upon, you get paid. So I guess my question is how can you,
let me take over. Let me save you, Sophia.
I've got so many questions, but
there's categories of how you have to first categorize somebody, right? So, we can talk about the categorizations, and then they're like on our prep work we just talked a couple of minutes ago, but she has to know each thing individually about the case and what it is. But talk a little bit about the categories, maybe, Karen, about how you would categorize somebody.
Sure. Yeah, it would be really great, Sophia, if it were as simple as you make an agreement and you pay people in accordance with the agreement. But what we find in the real world is that people are always looking for ways around the rules. And when you try to find ways around the rules, you sometimes find yourself in a bit of a predicament. So the first thing you're going to do when you need help is you're going to have to decide, do you want an outside contractor or do you want an employee? And that's an area where people get into a lot of trouble, because if you are a business person and you categorize all of your workers as independent contractors, that puts you at risk, I think, because it's unlikely that everybody who does work for you is an independent contractor. It could be possible, but it's just unlikely. You may have somebody that you employ to sit at your business between certain hours to do certain tasks, like answer the phones, for example. Well, that's a job that's really unlikely to be an independent contractor, and you probably shouldn't classify that person as an independent contractor. I've been through a few Department of Labor audits with companies who've done that, and we've had to go through and review each person on their payroll and say, well, what is it that this person does day to day? What are you asking of them? What else do they do? Who else do they work for? And how should this person be classified? So if you're going to classify someone as an employee, for example, you're going to give them a tax form to fill out, and they're going to tell you how much they want withheld from their paycheck. If they're not to be an employee, you're going to give them a different tax form, and they're going to give you their taxpayer ID number, and you're not going to withhold from their paycheck. Now, that doesn't mean IRS isn't going to get their share. It means that the employee is going to, or the worker is going to bear an additional cost because you've classified them as an independent contractor. In an employment situation, the employee pays part and the employer matches. So the contractor loses the matching portion, which is why a lot of people try to get around the law and name everybody as an independent contractor, because they can save that extra bump that they would have to pay to the IRS. I mean,
So
there are
the
a
funny
lot of
thing is,
reasons, but that's one of the reasons why people do it.
is when you first started, you talked about the rules and stuff. The one thing that wasn't mentioned is, like in my case, I didn't know the rules at a certain point in time as I was growing my business. So it's funny, it was a crapshoot and a guessing game for me, and I never really knew where to go. Hence, this is really the most important reason why I'm even having you on, is because there are a lot of businesses that, they're a technician. They know their trade, they begin working and they grow, they start hiring people, right? And so a lot of people like me, for instance, I mean, my first 10 years was everybody was an independent contractor, no matter what they did for me, except, well, call center, I guess I paid them. But other than that, no matter what they did, independent contractor. And totally wrong, because they were my employees, and so as I talk to other clients of mine, and I don't give legal advice, as everybody knows, and I say that, but I will recognize if they're clearly doing it wrong, to say you need to look at your local, or your, laws, and definitely and I'll send them the DOL fact sheet and the FLSA fact sheet, and kind of, I'll kind of go over it with them and say, listen, you still got to find somebody, like I have Karen that I call up for all my legal advice and stuff, but there is certain, and I think most people get, like, the off people are kind of like that, and maybe I'm sure you've seen it where they don't, but it's when you start getting to the field people, what, I mean, the classifications of what is a field person and what is a non-exempt employee. And so when you go to the FLSA fact sheet, it talks about what qualifies as a non-exempt and what is an exempt employee. So like an exempt employee, for instance, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Karen, but if you're an outside salesperson, you don't come to the office at a desk, you're not required to do anything inside, and you're literally off on your own as a lone wolf to sell for the company with no parameters except for bring us stuff to do, essentially is an exempt employee. Am I right?
There is a category for outside sales that is exempt, which means that person is you're kind of combining two different concepts. This is not the concept of whether they're an independent contractor or an employee, but whether they're exempt or non-exempt. Exempt employees are not entitled to overtime, and non-exempt are entitled to overtime. But let me back up a minute. You mentioned get resources, finding help at the get-go when you're setting up your business. So I know that there may be people who are watching this who are not in Texas. We're in Texas. The Texas Workforce Commission has a handy little booklet. It might be half an inch thick or something. I think it's entitled Especially for Texas Employers, and it's free. I would recommend that you obtain that from the Texas Workforce Commission. And it talks about these things, and it talks about your responsibilities as an employer. But at the same time, for the same reason that I don't recommend that you download forms off the internet and DIY all of your legal work, I would recommend that you get some competent advice and talk to somebody who's been doing this, or ask the person who you usually consult on legal matters to refer you to someone who has experience in employment matters, because it's just like you would not go to a dermatologist to have eye surgery. You don't go to a tax lawyer to discuss your employment situation necessarily. You know, there's different things. A personal injury lawyer is not the same thing as an employment practitioner. But get help and get it set up right at the get-go, and you'll save yourself a lot of expense and a lot of heartache down the road. A lot of times where we see this coming up is someone will go to the Department of Labor and say, I thought I was supposed to get time and a half. And the investigation begins. And when they investigate for that employee, they might decide that what they're going to do is a company audit. And that becomes an investigation of everyone. And then they'll let you know not only how much do you owe that employee, but how much do you owe all of your employees. So it's better to look into it and try to get off to a good start. Let's say, though, that you're already well underway, you've been in business for some years, it's not too late. You can fix it and you can do things the right way on a go forward basis. So the ostrich approach with your head in the sand is not the one that I recommend.
Take it from my advice. She's correct.
No comment.
Yep. And so, and what Karen's saying here, seriously, just hear everybody listen. It's cheaper to find some advice from an attorney than it is to get in trouble from the DOL or another path that you might get in trouble and be in court. So that's what she's saying. And I have learned over the years to call before I take action to her, as she knows. And so it is in your best interest to spend their hourly rate once or 2 hours to get a correct answer. And, you know, I mean, Karen helped me set up our employee handbook after we took a very generic one we purchased online for Texas. And we rewrote a lot of it. And she went through the whole thing line by line, made some corrections, asked us questions. And I mean, it may not be perfect, but because it's still a living document, we've added to it. But I feel comfortable that I was represented by her to do it. And so,
you know, there was an ad on television when I was a little girl, and the tagline was "Pay me now or pay me later." They were advertising oil filters, and it is pretty much like that. If you don't change your oil filter in your car, what happens? Well, if you don't take care of your business, what happens? And I'll tell you, there's an incentive built into the Fair Labor Standards Act. There's an incentive to do it right the first time. And that is, if someone were to take a judgment against you for wages that were owed to that person, that were improper, if they were to find that the person was improperly paid, then there's something called liquidated damages. Liquidated damages means you get $1 plus you get another dollar. So if you get your $1 of wages, you get another $1 of liquidated damages and attorney's fees. So people who want to, people who are forced to sue you to get their wages that they are legally due. And I say that because at this point in time, it would be already determined that the wages were legally due. They get an additional sum of money, plus their attorney gets paid in full. And that's not the way that you want to see this go if you're running a business.
It's essentially 3X. Whatever you owe, you're paying 3X.
Well, so you might look at it that way, except that let's say that they determine that the employee is due $10,000. That means the employee gets $10,000 in wages, $10,000 in liquidated damages, but their attorney's fees to collect that could be $70,000. It just depends on what they've had to do in order to get to that judgment.
Great point.
So it depends on let's say, for example, you're served with a lawsuit by somebody who says, you owe me X number of dollars of wages. Then maybe what you want to do is look at it and say, do I owe it or do I not? Do a really honest evaluation at that point in time and maybe resolve it there. Because if you go all the way through a lawsuit, appeals and all of that, the dollars rack up.
And I'll tell you one thing from my own experience with hiring attorneys, when she talked about hiring the right one in their field, if you hire the wrong attorney, that attorney will cost you more money than if you hired the right attorney in that sector. And so, I mean, having just a business attorney and then hiring them to maybe settle a lawsuit for an employment thing can be very costly. It can really rack up the money because they don't know the employment law and the strategies to go through a lawsuit versus the people in their field that deal with employment law like you are, that know the ins and outs of how it really falls down in the process of doing it. Like you said, like do the homework up front. Am I really paying them on as an honest audit of yourself? And then I would then hire someone to do it with you, an attorney like Karen, and then they will give you the legal advice of, okay, settle or do this, or let's do this. And so flat business attorneys are great. As you met, I have another attorney that does a lot of the little small stuff that Karen doesn't need to do. And he's a bulldog. He goes in there, if I have it's been a long time, but like we had a lawsuit about and it was a settled easy thing. And I don't think we even signed anything out of it. It was stupid. It was about a house in Galveston that got hit by a hurricane after we did the work. And it got re-raccoonized by like 40 raccoons after the hurricane we did the work. Well, the guy never showed up to see that we completed it, even though we had pictures. Well, all of a sudden I get served with papers about this house, and they wanted some dumb, like $5,000. And so I called up my other attorney, and he's like, just pay it. Because you're going to pay me $5,000 anyway to defend this. And I'm just like, okay. And so
but you do raise an interesting point, which is be careful about just price shopping attorneys. You pick up the phone, go find attorneys. You could probably pick up the Yellow Pages, if that even exists anymore, but you could probably pick it up and find somebody who will quote you a lower rate. But rate isn't everything, because you take the rate times the hours. So how many hours will it take them to do it?
Yeah.
Experience counts, and you want to get somebody who knows what they're doing.
I concur from my own experience. So we've talked about that. I think everybody kind of gets the idea that you should at least go find advice outside of yourself to see if you're going to pay the people correctly. So then let's get into the OT and the exempt stuff, because to me, that's kind of where people get in trouble more.
Yeah, I have a question about that.
Okay.
So say you have a call center employee and you label them a 1099. What can happen from doing that?
Well, first of all, I'm not saying that all call center people are not independent contractors. Again, you have
You're
to
the lawyer.
look at
Listen
the
to that.
economic realities of the situation of that employee's conditions of employment. And there are a number of different tests, and you can go to the Department of Labor website to review those tests in connection with your business. If that person is free to work whenever they want, if they provide their own equipment, if they're free to work for other people, you don't put any restrictions on them, for example, maybe you're okay classifying them as exempt. But in a situation, to enforce the Fair Labor Standards Act, people have multiple choices. They can either go to in Texas, they go to the Texas Workforce Commission, or in your state, wherever you are, you may have a different agency, or they can go to the Department of Labor, or they can go straight to almost any level of court to assert their claims. Typically what you'll get is a demand letter, and then it's off to the races. What I would recommend, though, is that before you get to that point, make sure that you keep records of when they work. Now, a lot of times I hear, oh, I don't need to keep records because I pay them on a salary. Salary doesn't matter. If the person is an employee that is entitled to overtime pay, then you don't get off saying, well, they're salaried employees, so I can work them as many hours as I want. The salary will be used to compute what their hourly rate would be, and then you have a computation to their overtime pay. So start with keeping good records, because in case law, the presumption is that it's your job as an employer to keep the records. And if you fail to keep the records, even if they're salaried, if you're the one who had that obligation and you failed to keep the records, the employee comes in and the employee estimates what they worked. They're probably not underestimating, they could be, but they get to say well, I worked every week, I worked 80 hours a week. And then you have a contest to see if that's true or not. You can solve that simply by keeping records up front.
It's the burden of the employer to prove that they didn't work it, correct?
It's the employer's burden to keep accurate records of the hours worked.
I was just using that scenario you just said. If they said as an employee, I said I worked every week, worked 80 hours, and I brought lawsuit against my employer, then he may in discovery have to figure out, and prove his stuff, but it's still the employer's burden to prove that he didn't work it, correct?
Not exactly. It's the employer can put forth records showing what the employee worked, and then it would be the employee's burden to show that that's not true, that I worked extra. Or, for example, sometimes employers will say, don't write this down. Or I've seen employers who say to them, you better turn in a slip every week that says I worked 40. I don't want to see anything else.
Or we're working off the clock on this one, that kind of terminology.
Yes.
Yeah, I've heard that from people too. Yeah.
Yes. So when the employee then comes over and brings 6 witnesses that say, no, we were told working off the clock is what we're doing this week or this tonight or whatever, then they may have met their burden.
Yeah.
Then somebody's not telling the truth.
Right. So along with the same subject here, and we'll get back to that same scenario I brought up earlier, is about the sales exemption. So I think in the most service industries, that's where you answered, and I hope everybody, and I'll make it very clear. And she said it once, I'm going to repeat it. Salary does not justify not overtime. So get that through your head. Everyone listening, salary does not say that. I'm not saying it does, but I'm saying it is not I put you on salary, you get what you get, doesn't matter.
You want me to go through a couple of other things that aren't determinative?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say that on the first day of employment, they came in the door and you had them sign an independent contractor agreement. That's not determinative either. It might be some indication. What are you using? Are you using their social security number or a taxpayer identification number? Who are you paying? Are you paying this person or are you paying their LLC?
Right.
Are you paying them in cash or check, or are you withholding or are you not withholding? What are the exemptions for your specific industry? You have to look at a lot of different things. So it's a very fact-intensive inquiry. Each case has to be looked at differently.
So, well, let's just talk about the industry that we're in now then. So, I mean, generally, and this would be chimneys. I guess I can only speak more about the chimney industry. It's like we have a divide in the industry where there are sales people that do not like lay a brick, do the work. And then there are guys that will sell it and then they show up and lay the brick after they sell it. And then there are guys that will be a combination of that. And I don't know how to define it more than I sold it. I don't necessarily show up to do the work, but I'll babysit while they're doing it. I'll sit in my truck, I'll make other calls, and while the guys are working, they can come ask me questions type stuff. That's kind of the 3 ways that the industry is doing it. And I always define it to my people that I coach, or anyone that asks me, as we talk about the exempt sales status. If they're not doing the work and they're only selling and they're not doing it from an office, you're setting their appointments and they're going out, they're doing it, and they have a range of, just go there today type of thing. Uh, uh, I classify them as exempt in my business. And so I tell everybody, I don't know what exempt means in your state, but in mine, that's how I do it. Now, if I were to make them do 50% of the work, I would probably start paying them overtime, because now they're not exempt anymore, because they're more of the function of their job is also takes them out of the classification of being exempt. And so that's how I've explained it to everybody that we do. I always say, still do what you have to do and seek your advice, but that's what we do. And so with your help, you helped me get to that. And I think we always had I think you had defined it for me, whether this, and by the way, this wasn't from case law. This wasn't, we kind of determined, and maybe you've corrected over the last few years. I mean, that doesn't mean they can't lay a brick to be exempt. They do have we have a little leeway, correct? Like if they had if not less than, if 10% or less is doing actual work, they can stay exempt. And I know it's per case, I get that, but that's kind of what I think I had understood it being defined back when I was doing my exemptions.
Well, there may be some de minimis exceptions. Again, like you said, we have to look at what each person is doing. But you're also going to look at things like you mentioned the case where somebody is not laying the brick, but they are there on the job site. And then I would ask you, are they required to be there? Are they required to stay? Are they free to do other things while they're there? I mean, that, can they be taking sales calls for their nighttime job too at the same time, because they're independent contractors and they're free to have multiple clients? You're just one of them? Or
Well,
is
they're not
it?
independent contractors, they're employees.
Mhm.
In my case, in the scenario that I just, they're all employees. So we're off the independent contractors. I guess more of the question that I'm going to here is they're all employees. So do they qualify for overtime or not? Was really where I was going. I guess I should have clarified that. The ICs.
Is this person a supervisor? Are they supervising at least 2 employees? Do
I
they
think
have?
you would say yes to most people, but in my company, I don't have them do that, so it's a no.
Okay. Do they have hiring and firing authority? Do they have any authority to make any kind of decisions? Do they have discretionary authority? There's a lot of different, it depends on which exemption you're claiming. If you're claiming an outside sales exemption, then you'd look at the Department of Labor regulations for outside sales exemptions, and you'd make sure that all of the assignment that you're giving to this person fits within that category. If you're giving them an exemption based upon being a manager, then you have to look at those exemptions so that they fit within those exemptions. So the devil's in the details here,
Yeah, which I get. But then let's take it off of those people. Then we're dealing with guys that are literally showing up to do the work, and they're on salary. I don't, and they are told to be somewhere at a certain time. They're told when to complete it, no matter what. I mean,
They provide the equipment.
You're doing everything, and then they still pay them as an IC, and it's like, or they don't give them overtime because they're salary. Both scenarios are in the industry, either way, and it's like, and that's when I'll say, well, I can't give you legal advice, but in my opinion, if that were my company, I can't do it like that.
Yeah.
And so,
if I were you, I would go get some legal advice and figure out what your exposure is because of the way you're doing it.
That's a great conversation pivot right there. Exposure. You talked about it a little bit, with I said 3X, and you went, whoa, wait a minute, you got to pay us. Us can be 70 grand, so it took the 3X to, 10, 20X. So what I hear, so I'll tell you, right, from many people over the years, well, my people love me. They're never going to do that. I treat them well. Tell me a little bit about that.
There are a lot of forces that drive people to make decisions that you wouldn't have anticipated. Sometimes the forces are a spouse that says, hey, you're not being treated right, and I'm not going to get off your case until you stand up for yourself. Sometimes the forces are their economic needs. Times are tough, man. I don't want to do this, but I need to. You know, there's a lot of different reasons why people do it. It could be too that one day you do something that really annoys them and they start talking over beer with their neighbor, and their neighbor says, you know, this is wrong. And so then they call up the Workforce Commission or the Department of Labor, and they find out, I've been cheated out of 3 years worth of overtime, and there's something I can do about it. And so there's a lot of things that motivate people. Now, I will tell you that everyone knows that there are bogus lawsuits that are brought, but there's also a lot of lawsuits that are brought because people were genuinely cheated out of the amount that they're due.
Right.
So something will happen someday, or not, that will drive them into action. Sometimes it will be that, you know, employee A would never have done anything, but now B is doing something, so A joins.
Yeah. And I think one thing people need to understand, they do pile on. And the thing about, I don't think people, I mean, you mentioned it, but I think it went over everybody's head. And and this is kind of what, to Sophia's point, what would I do? Were you talking, Sophia, a little bit about in a call center? Might have been you in the past.
No, I'm just,
Oh, okay.
I know nothing about any of this, and wanting to have my own business one day, would be important for me to learn. So like,
Sure.
Genuinely, I am just trying to figure out, if you classify somebody the wrong way, how, like, what happens? What can happen to you legally? That was my only question, because I have no idea how any of it works.
To the point I was trying to make here was this: as an employee, and I may be wrong here, but I think I'm right, attorneys in the employment law take the lawsuit on at no expense to the employees generally. Is that correct?
Sometimes.
Most of the time?
Well, it depends on what's at stake. I mean, for example, if I were to find out that all of, you know, ABC Corporation employees are being paid wrong under the statute, if they're being paid incorrectly, then I would say cha-ching, cha-ching. You know, there would be a great opportunity for a class action where all of the employees could get what they are owed, and I could get paid as well. It's harder if there's just one, you know. So
Right.
So it depends on what the scenario is.
But your cha-ching is because the company's going to pay. This is the point I'm trying to make. The
Right.
employees aren't going to pile on and all save up to pay you. You're going to take it pro bono because you see that you vetted it enough, right? That they're wrong. And you're going to probably take it pro bono because they're going to be forced to pay you.
It's not called pro bono. It's called a contingency fee arrangement. It's I will get paid if you get paid. Gotcha. And yes, if I find out that they've got a systemic problem, then that would be a case that would make sense to take on a contingency fee basis. If there's one person who is owed some money, maybe it doesn't make sense for a contingent fee arrangement because I can't give all of my time away.
Right. But I was trying to say, because our audience is business owners. So what I'm trying to say is, if you're in that, I'm just, head in the sand, you said earlier, right? If you're living that head in the sand,
yes,
the possibility of it is like you said, maybe not. But if that possibility hits and you're now on the target of your employees, and one finds out, no matter how much your people like you, it may be that fact of everyone's saying, okay, well, you do owe me this money. well, I do like you, but yeah, you've been paying me wrong for 10 years I've worked here and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
I want to be compensated for what I should have been legally paid.
And the person who's going to represent that employee is going to ask them, who else has been paid this way?
Yes.
How many people are not being paid correctly? How many people are being misclassified? And that's why I answered the way that I did, because it really is going to look like a better situation if the employer, for example, has done what I started out by saying, classified everyone as an independent contractor. Well, I know I can get somebody out of that group, out of the independent contractor category. So there's more incentive to me to take that case.
Right.
Representing the employee, and it's going to cost the employer, the employer's fees, and the employee's fees.
That's the part I'm trying to get out in the podcast here. So you're going to cover your own fees. You're going to also cover everybody else's fees. And that you don't think, so the lawsuits may not be that expensive until you cover fees. The fees alone are really your damages, Tell
you, as a mediator, I hear all the time, people will come into mediation and they'll say, well, I'd rather pay my attorney than to pay that person one nickel. And if they stick with that approach, then they really need to open their wallet.
Yeah.
I had one lawyer say to me one time, yeah, well, that's what my client is saying now, but I haven't sent my first bill.
Yeah.
We'll see if they're still saying that after my bill.
Exactly. So, and really, I'm just trying to get people to do it right. It costs you more in the long run to do it right, to do it wrong. No matter, and the point you made was just brilliant. Even if you've been doing it long for so long, you can still get right. And so, I mean, and to do that even still is going to be less expensive than if you, let's just say, get caught doing it wrong. And so
it's different in different states. But like on the classification issue between employer and employee, let me tell you that as far as the employee matching portion, you're talking about 0.0765. That's the difference. That's the matching part. So it's not a very big cost to making them an employee. You're going to have different considerations in different states because, for example, in Texas, we do not have a requirement that you carry workers' comp insurance. I'm sure that there are some states where you still have to have that. Each state is going to be different, and you should consult with someone in your state knowledgeable of those laws. But analyze with the help of competent advisors whether it's worth it to try to skirt the employer-employee relationship or to skirt the overtime rules. Is it worth it?
right. And I would say it's not. I don't know if you're one of my listeners, it's not. Do it right. Because, I did it wrong for so long and I knew I was doing it wrong, but I did it incompetently because I didn't even know where to go. I mean, I started with pre-internet or pretty close to starting at I started my business at the dawn of the internet, early 90s, mid 90s. And so as we went through it, it's funny how my incompetence was, I never even thought to look up how to do it. And when I did a couple times, I kind of went nowhere. And so this was, we're talking 1997, 98, maybe in the early 2000s. And I didn't see a whole lot of good, quick first page. Now you have advice on Google, but or where to go and like who to call. And I didn't back then. And it's funny how I see now that people do have that quick information type to go find out who you could talk to, hire, and at minimum, even though you say not to, at least find some advice direction that I did not have, and start in the right direction. But I still find people that are still, I'm not talking about the guys that know they're doing it wrong and are trying to skirt. I'm talking about the people that don't know, don't have a way, haven't looked into this, and that they carry this elephant on their head because they have their head in the sand and they're like, I don't know what to do, but as long as it's working now, so I'm not going to bother with it. But they know it's wrong, or at least they think they know it's wrong. And I was kind of in that category for probably 12 to 15 years. And it's a burden as the, and I'll tell you, everyone, here is the biggest advice. This is advice. It does not cost you much more to do it right than it does to do it wrong. Everyone thinks, well, it's going to cost me so much to match. I'm going to add workman's comp. If you're in Texas, I didn't have workman's comp for years. All this stuff, price of doing business. Yes, it's expensive on the yearly P&L, but doing business daily and doing a weekly P&L, it's not. And so when you take it to the level of think smaller instead of the big number, it's just, you may have to increase your prices just a little bit, but doing it right, it takes the burden of your own integrity and makes it true. I mean, I have no integrity issues in my mind of, am I paying my people right? None. I have zero. I used to have it. If it came up, it was like, I don't know if I'm doing right. And it was like, that they got slouchy. It was like, I don't know. I was like that. I didn't know, and until I had met Karen, and she made me a Superman, and at least doing what we feel is correct and be able to, I kind of think it's more like this. If you hear her talk already, we can defend the way we pay people, whether it's right or wrong. We think we're doing it correct, but I have Karen on my side to defend it because we think we're doing it the proper way. Right? Is that a good way to say it? I mean, I would think.
What do you think I would say if you came to me and said, well, I didn't know. I didn't know I was doing it wrong.
Well, ignorance is not what, that's the old say. You say ignorance is not whatever part of the law. So
yeah, it's not a defense. It is not a defense.
Thank you. Ignorance is not a defense. And which, by the way, when I first met her, I heard that a lot. So, but it's true, and it's a great thing to understand. And honestly, sometimes when I talk to some people about they bring it up to me. I don't bring it up. They bring it up to me when I mention to them, you might want to seek some counsel because that does not sound, in my opinion, the way I would pay people. Because it sounds, I'll start using the word sketchy now. It sounds a little sketchy. And then they're like, they kind of get pissed off at me. Like, well, not, I'm like, I can't help it. You're doing it wrong. You asked me, at least it sounds like you're doing it wrong, And so I'll give you a perfect example of what happened to me a few years ago. I had someone that I know who owns a business, a distributorship, and they did home shows, or like they had their own yearly home show that everybody came in. And I was talking to them, and one of the guys said they were literally at the clock, or they had not clocked, they had worked like 90 hours that week. And I went, oh, did you get paid for that? He goes, no, I didn't say anything. So when I talked to the owner 2 or 3 days later, I said, hey, and these people work like this for a month because they get prepared for doing the show, right? For like a month. And they were like working like literally 7 a.m. till 10 o'clock at night for 3 or 4 weeks. And then they did the show, and they were like stupid that week too. And then it was over, and they tore it down, and it was done. But I'm like, every month you do this? Every year? Once they're like, yeah. And I was like, so I went and mentioned it to him, and he pulled the old ignorance of the law thing. We pay these guys good. They're not gonna ever say anything. And I just went, okay, well, okay, whatever. The
other thing that I often hear is everybody in my business does this. This what all the others are doing. If I do it differently, then I'll be out of business because I'm having higher costs than my competitors. And what do you think I say about that?
Yeah. Well, my answer to that
if everyone else jumps off a bridge, are you going to? It's
exactly. Well, I take it the other way. I say, well, you want to be the leader in the industry, or do you want to keep following? That's what I say.
Good point.
Yeah. And so, and they look at me, it's like, well, didn't you tell me? I'll say to them, well, didn't you tell me you are the leading whatever in your market? Well, yeah, I am. And I'm going to be, well, then do it right. If you do it right, there is no wrong, right? I mean, so that was kind of a weird sentence. But it is true. and I will say this for anything to anybody for anything. When you get right, and this is with any aspect of your life, but truthfully in business, it feels good. It really does. When we got right 7, 8 years ago, I'm telling you, I don't have that headache in my mind. I don't lose sleep over it. I mean, I know I'm doing what I know to do the best, and it's pretty backed up, you know, by the law pretty well. So I'm thankful for Karen and what I've grown to know through her and my own experiences. So um, do you have anything else, Sophia or Karen? Can you think of anything else? I think we've had an excellent time on the podcast here. Some good information to everybody, which does not, by the way, is not Texas only. I mean, she used some Texas stuff and she clarified this, but generally, I mean, all the advice here is pretty standard across the line. Find someone that can help you. And notice she never said attorney. She just kept saying someone, advisor, whatever it is for your state, and do that and get right. Even though how far you might be in business, it's not going to hurt you to correct it. So
I would add one other thing, and that is that when you sit there secure in the knowledge that none of your employees are going to complain, what I've found over the years is that sometimes the Department of Labor finds target industries to audit. So I know that for a while they were going after the construction industry. They were concerned about the people who would go in to the big builders, and the big builders hired only subcontractors under them to do each aspect of the building. And so they started going after each of the subcontractors to make sure, all the way down to the one who employed the guy who comes in and sweeps before the job. I mean, they were targeting all of the different levels of the complete construction job, so that each level would say, these people aren't my employees, they're the employee of the guy above me. Because it was the top guys that were claiming everybody is an independent contractor. Right. So they would do that. And I know they went after lawn maintenance companies, and we saw a whole group of lawn maintenance companies that got audited in a short period of time. I know that they at one point were focusing on legal assistance, because lawyers didn't want to pay overtime to their legal assistants. And so, it could be a thing specific to your company, or it could be something outside forces are doing, like an industry audit. But I agree with what you said, Chad. It's better to try to do things right. Try to pay people what they're owed. You reap what you sow.
Yeah. And that's a great way to end it. So thank you, Karen, for coming on. I enjoyed it. We've been trying to do it for a year now over to get you on here, and we finally got it. And so, by the way, anyone in Texas, she's doing my will on Friday. So if you need a will, she's doing the will. A little plug there. Karen doesn't just do business, but she'll do a lot of stuff that might be in her fortes. She's doing my will, because right now my wife just gets everything, but who gets it if we both die? Whatever the state says, right? So she's doing it to where my kids will get it. So we'll go from there. But yeah, thank you, Karen, very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.